We all know the state of Florida has been growing tremendously. We would expect most new construction in Florida to be of CBS, concrete block structure, like the structure you're seeing right here. Unfortunately, the reality of most of these new apartments in Florida is that they're being made out of OSB plywood, practically cardboard. Many of these investments are then sold within the first few years to somebody else after they've already quickly profited from the investment. See, what most people don't understand about these new constructions in Florida is that within the first 3 years of construction, they've already made their money back. Thus, when they're building, the only thing that they actually make out of concrete block is the shaft for the elevators. Everything else is literally made out of cardboard, plywood, OSB, and other materials that will not stand the test of time, further less a hurricane. With the start of hurricane season around the corner for the state of Florida, we're already starting to see the consequences of what happens when you build affordably in the state of Florida. Not that these places are affordable for the people renting them. Far from that, many of these luxury apartments, as they're labeled, come with amenities like car wash, dog washing station, pools, gyms, and other therapeutic areas that are nothing more than amenities that people renting have to pay for, whether they're going to use them or not. And really, the people leasing these apartments don't have an option because all of these new apartment complexes come with a massive assortment of amenities. When we say cheap and affordable, we're talking about the quality of the build. These are the lakes at Northport, just south of Sarasota. Currently on Google Maps, they're rated at 2.7, with residents complaining about mold and roaches. And you're probably wondering, how can a newer looking apartment complex have these types of problems? Some of the reviews are recent, like this one a month ago showing mold around the windows. You may recall that less than a year ago, this area was hit by a few hurricanes, and it's possible that much of the damage that these apartments have are coming from hurricanes. Now, hurricane season is right around the corner, and a lot of these newer constructions are having a lot of problems. Structural settling, which is a normal process, seems to be particularly too familiar to people living in these newer apartment complexes. It's not a surprise that many of these buildings are having structural settling to a massive degree, considering these are quickly built wood structures over filled-in swamps. But of course, the future and long-term expectations for these types of construction sites isn't a priority to the builder. Like I said, the return on investment comes within the first 3 years. Little do they care what happens 10 years down the line, but for us who live here in Florida, what is the future of our state when so many of these buildings are being built so cheaply? Well, for one, we know that the state of Florida is prone to termites, bed bugs, roaches, and of course silverfish, a plethora of different insects that all damage wooden structures. It's very clear that the future of these quote-unquote luxury apartments isn't meant to be a very long haul. But when they flip their investments and are long gone with their money and profits, the people of Florida in these communities are going to be stuck with these matchstick, rat, and roach infested apartment complexes that definitely cannot stand the test of time in Florida. What is going to become of these communities? Just so you guys can understand the math, 300 apartments times, what's the average rent these days? $21.50, let's say. The average apartment complex is bringing in about $645,000 a month, over $7.7 million in the first year. But see, they don't really hold on to these investments for more than 3 years. Once they've made their return on investment, which is easily within the first 3 years, then they sell that complex off to somebody else and use that money to continue furthering the construction of new apartment complex. Perhaps that is why in Florida, despite the fact that many of these apartments are empty, they still continue building these monstrosities on the outskirts of cities. Now, back in the day, we had hurricanes like Andrew that changed the landscape of building in the state of Florida. If you're not really aware of this, the state of Florida has strict building codes. Particularly the southern part of the state has some of the strictest building codes in the nation. That is because the state of Florida, particularly the southern half, is very prone to hurricane landfall. So that is why much of this new apartment building craze has been happening in central Florida and in inland counties that don't have higher standards for building. Yeah, places like Polk County, Hillsborough County, and other areas of the state that don't have strict building codes is predominantly where most of this growth has taken place. Just look at the Naples and Fort Myers area. You may have noticed that perhaps in Naples, Florida, or Miami, they just haven't built too many of these crappy apartment complexes. That is because these counties have stricter building codes. It's places like inland Lee County, inland Manatee County, Hillsborough County, Polk County, and other counties that have more relaxed building codes where they've been able to make their cookie cutter projects on a massive scale. And this is kind of a fraud because most people don't realize the difference between the properties that they're buying in Polk County, Florida versus what you would get along the coastline in South Florida. They assume because aesthetically it looks the same that it's the same product for a better price. But what they don't realize that if that same exact house that they're buying in Citrus, Lake, Sumter, or Polk County existed in South Florida, it would cost roughly about the same, except it wouldn't be legal to build that house there. In some counties, the building requirement is only as low as 115 miles per hour. And as we know, hurricanes usually hit the southern part of the state, but we saw last year with hurricanes like Helene, Milton, that perhaps the central part of the state could eventually be a landfall for other hurricanes, perhaps even as high as Category 5. I mean, the hurricanes that hit Sarasota last year, it was unprecedented. There haven't been hurricanes like that in nearly 100 years, but we saw areas that hadn't got hit by hurricanes start to get hit by hurricanes. When Hurricane Ian was spinning off the coast of Southwest Florida, it had winds of over 155 miles per hour sustained. In Central Florida, some of these newer homes that are being built in these communities are only meant to withstand winds of 115 to 120 miles an hour, 135 miles an hour if you're lucky. In the case of a Category 5, holding sustained winds across the Tampa Bay area and reaching some of these inland counties, the destruction to these newer construction sites would be unforeseen. These are construction sites that are not able to withstand the weather of Florida. Counties in this region of the state have been short-minded and only seeing immediate benefits and more construction, and haven't looked a little bit further down the road to see what's going to happen when all these thousands of new construction sites that can barely withstand winds of 115 miles an hour have to deal with a Category 5 hurricane. See, they're only looking at reaping in the short-term benefit, and they haven't really looked too far ahead into the future. You can tell that here in this suburban mess outside of Tampa, the effects of unplanned development are visible. From the fact that there's road congestion even though it's the off-season, traffic patterns that don't make any sense, they simply rezoned agricultural areas, allowed them to go in with these huge developments, and now even on the off season, and this isn't during rush hour, this is much earlier in the day, there's already traffic congestion in these suburbs of Tampa. Imagine what these suburbs look like in the winter when all this traffic comes through during rush hour. It's very clear that the bad planning of the state of Florida is starting to be visible, and in the case of the building codes that haven't caught up with the climatical changes, and the expectation that one day this part of Florida will be getting hit by a Category 5 hurricane, are the people buying these properties aware that the building regulations that exist in these counties are not sufficient for the likely weather scenarios that they're going to face in this area? All you have to do is look at the Sarasota area. Within a 2-week period, we saw 2 hurricanes. Previously, this area hadn't got hit by a hurricane in over 100 years. And this scale of construction in the state of Florida in these counties is also unprecedented. Take Pasco County to the north of Tampa. They've added over 300,000 people in the last 25 years nearly doubling the county's population. Much of that growth is far inland in areas where the building codes and the expectations for new construction are clearly not up to standard with these Category 5 hurricanes that could possibly hit this coastline. People living in these newer apartment complexes, as new as 2 years old, are already reporting silverfish infestations in these apartments. Over many years, this infestation can definitely crumble these apartments and literally make them fall to the ground. However, because the intention is to flip these apartment complexes very quickly, nobody really has the intention to hold on to these investments for the long term. They're not really addressing these problems. You would think that if you're a resident of a building and you complain about silverfish or termites, that they would instantly do something about it. The reality is they don't really care. It's going to be somebody else's problem down the line. If that doesn't sound like the ideology of building in Florida, I don't know what does. What these apartments look like 10, 15, 20 years from now, nobody seems to care. And when the next Category 5 hurricane comes and hits Florida, they don't seem to care about that either, because at the end of the day, the only thing they care about is making the cheapest apartments they can in the largest scale they can so they can reap the most profit. But it's the state of Florida that's now allowing these developers to go in and build these massive construction sites all over these counties in Florida and not care neither about the long-term health hazards that these types of buildings are going to cause to the people living in Florida, damage to property, or even the safety of people. The only thing they really care about is flipping, building, and building at the expense of the future of Florida. This isn't Wisconsin or somewhere in the Midwest. This is the state of Florida. It's literally a swamp here full of termites and other animals that will quickly disintegrate construction sites or anything that isn't up to par. Combine that with hurricanes that can bring feet of rainwater within a quick period of time, combined with sustained winds of over 100 miles an hour that can last for up to 10 hours, and the chances of these buildings realistically standing up to the test of time in Florida is definitely a question mark. So with the fact that all this construction is taking place in Florida on a massive scale, and we're starting to see hurricanes be stronger and be more unpredictable, why do these counties in Florida continue to allow people to build houses knowing very well that they're not able to withstand the test of time in Florida? Ultimately, these counties having relaxed building codes and wind zone regulations could in fact lead to many problems like we're facing in the insurance world, because the responsibility has to fall on somebody. Unless it's a hospital or other type of facility, you're just not seeing proper construction happening throughout the state of Florida. As long as they continue to build these cheap and affordable CBS and plywood and cardboard construction sites throughout the entire state, it's going to create a hazard not only for the people living in these structures, but also for the long-term sustainability of Florida, particularly in the world of insurance. When a massive hurricane hits, what's going to happen to all these houses and apartment complexes that are without a doubt going to see damages? The apartment complexes in Northport, Florida are a prime example of what happens when these apartments get hit directly by a hurricane. The reviews of the residents drop dramatically. For a newer apartment complex in this part of Florida to have a review that low, 2.7, should give you an idea of the types of problems that these residents are facing, from mold in the windows, walls in their apartments, to infestations of cockroaches from moisture. Keep in mind that once these wood construction sites do have damage and do start to get mold, then the cockroaches, the silverfish, the termites, all of that moves in, and it creates hazardous conditions for the people that end up in these cardboard houses that are being built all over the state of Florida. This is what's happening in the state of Florida, where only the elevator shafts are made out of concrete block. It wouldn't be a far stretch to say that the future of Florida could be something like what Baltimore looks like today, a failure of the past that will haunt the state of Florida for many decades to come. At the rate that they're building these apartment complexes all over suburban Florida, it wouldn't be a surprise if in the future these luxury living become nothing more than the hoods of tomorrow. And with the building quality that these apartment complexes come with, It'll probably happen a lot quicker than you could imagine. Florida, where cash rules everything and short profits precede any type of logic or future planning development. Everything is for the right now, no thought given to the future.